Welcome back to another episode of the Return of the Roar Sacramento Kings podcast on Sactown Sports. Right after the Sacramento Kings fired Mike Brown. No easy way to get that one off, but my name is Brenden Nunes. Frankie Cartoscelli here as well. What's going on, Frank?
Brenden, Chris Watkins also joining us on this fine Saturday morning. Not great. It's just not been a great 24, not quite 24 hours, but 20 hours for the Sacramento Kings. Kind of just feels like we got thrown back in a DeLorean and put back into 2021. And it's really just kind of been a real swift kind of stroke of reality. And I was even driving last night to dinner with the in-laws, and just kind of a couple hours after all the news broke, and we all scrambled to do what we do on our end and everything. And I don't think I had a full chance to really kind of soak it all in. And when I was driving, like, we were kind of driving in silence, and I literally just kind of blurted out, they really did that. Like, they fired Mike Brown because ineptitude from the front office. I don't know, but I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts. And obviously a lot of thoughts are being thrown around by not just Kings fans, but former head coaches, former Kings head coaches, former Kings players. So let's dive into it.
Chris Watkins with us here as well. How you feeling, man?
Good, yeah. I mean, I guess as good as you can be feeling on the morning after something like this happens. I actually do have a similar story to Frankie, where I was out and about last night with some, I wouldn't say casual, but like some people who, this wouldn't normally be the kind of conversation we have, and we were out at dinner, and I kind of had the same thing where I was like, what happened for me at work today is the Kings fired their head coach, and just having to explain the whole situation, and again, them kind of knowing what the situation was like, just having to try and explain why this did feel out of nowhere. They are correct in feeling that, but also how this is at the same time been a culmination of things coming, but at the same time still feeling like this is way too fast for all this to happen. So we're going to get into it. This definitely feels like one of those where some things might get said, and some feelings are going to get felt, and I don't think any of us really know where this pod's going to go, but I think it's definitely going to be a conversation that I don't think any of us thought we were going to have this early. And one last thing is, it's really funny because I always used to tell you guys before every single game as they were doing the starting five, guys, one day you hear these cheers as they introduce Mike Brown. These cheers are at some point going to become boos. I can no longer say that because they never became boos. And that, I think, is ultimately a sign of how this thing went, is that it just felt like, yes, there was some frustration, but it just feels like it happened really suddenly.
It did happen quick. 13-18 so far this season. That's 31 games down with 51 to go. I was saying it yesterday with Frank Little. I guess we're too far to say it's still early, but there are still a lot of games left to be played in this season. 51 of the 82 still on their schedule, including tonight in LA. And the fashion of how they fired Mike Brown, I think, is how do you put this? Just gross, I guess, unprofessional, and I feel like Mike is owed better. So just before we get into maybe the decision, but it was reported, I mean, really, Mike Malone was the first one to talk about it. Denver Nuggets head coach got fired by Vivek Ranadive and the Sacramento Kings years ago, and talked about how Mike Brown told him that he got fired in the car, essentially on the way to the airport to get ready to go to LA. And this is maybe 15 minutes after the Kings had a practice where Mike Brown was just speaking to media and talking about how he's willing to take all the smoke and whatever. This is what I get paid for. And he was just in the building, leaves, gets a phone call from the front office. And The Athletic, Anthony Slater and Sam Amick wrote a piece about it, just kind of outlining how it all went down. And in here it says, quote, "But team sources insisted the decision to fire Brown was McNair's. The organization is choosing to back the front office of McNair and Wilcox, who are still considered safe amid this Kings struggle. This roster's depth has eroded the last 2 seasons, forcing Brown to search a rotation that hasn't always had answers. It's a weakness the front office acknowledges and is still attempting to remedy by the February 6th trade deadline. What?
Whose fault is that?
Is that not insane?
Where to begin? Okay, look, we've been around the team. We've been around these games. We've been talking to people that are more plugged in than we are and heard whispers that this was building for a bit. There had been disconnect between the front office and the coaching staff, specifically between Monty McNair and Mike Brown. That's something that we have heard from a couple of people, I believe. Knowing this was coming in this manner, I just wonder what was the determining factor to make it yesterday around, what was it, 1:40 p.m., right after Mike, like you said, was in the building, was on site, had not left for the airport yet. It's just the most, like, I think I said it before we started recording, like high school level type, like petty, I'm too afraid to confront you in person, I'm going to do it over the phone. And like, I don't care if there were, maybe the call or the okay came in right then and there, and that was when they had to do it. I just don't believe that. The fact that the wheels were in motion already, that the front office was waiting for approval from the front office to fire Mike Brown, and they did it over the phone, is just the most weird, like ridiculous, just back, like I said, back a couple of years ago, Sacramento Kings type move imaginable. And the fact that they're going on a one-game trip, a one-night trip to LA, they're back in Sacramento tomorrow. I don't understand what they're back on for their homestand, by the way. It's just the most bad. It's a horrible look. And again, with everyone that's been dragging the organization, rightfully so, and reverting back to it, that's the grossest part, like you said, that Mike Brown, who's been a respected coach in the NBA for decades now, that had stops in one in Cleveland, been with the Lakers, like he's been under Steve Kerr. He's been around the NBA for a very, very long time. This isn't some guy that was in his first stint as a head coach and young and green around the gills. This is Mike Brown. This is a guy that, if he continues to build on his coaching tree and experience, he might be in the Hall of Fame someday, just based on his own experience and the time around the game alone. You could see him in the Hall of Fame someday just off of that pedigree alone. Is he a Hall of Fame coach because of winning championships? No, but he's that kind of guy, and that's what Springfield honors. And Mike Brown has those values, and like you said, accountability. There hasn't been much accountability lately around the Kings organization. That's the one guy really who has kind of stood up through everything, and whether it's his fault or not, said I can be better. And was he perfect this year? No, he wasn't. His rotations were sporadic, and decision-making was poor at times. And we know that he wouldn't put the best defensive players on the court at the right times, and not a perfect product. But like that article says, the roster, the depth was eroding, or whatever the phrasing was over the past couple of years. Whose fault is that? So it's just very frustrating from that perspective that, should the Kings have made a coaching change down the line? Maybe that was in the cards for, sometime down the line if things didn't work out, but there's nothing that's going to change my mind. And Brenden, we talked about this on the air for like an hour plus yesterday, you for 4 hours, right before the news broke. I can't sit here and say the Sacramento Kings are a better team now that Mike Brown is gone. We'll see what happens, but I just can't sit here and say that right now I believe that's what's going to happen.
And it's interim Doug Christie taking over. I guess before getting to that point, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. One other thing I want to point out from this Athletic article is it says, quote, but the stern news conferences were beginning to wear on some players, team sources said, and were part of the decision to part ways with Brown. And that's just referencing, really the last 4 or 5 games throughout this losing streak where, Mike Brown pretty directly calls out De'Aaron before or after that last game against Detroit. And obviously De'Aaron had the pretty big blunder in that one that he reportedly took accountability for the next day at practice after his weird press conference. There's the Indiana game right before that where Mike Brown just makes it pretty clear that he didn't feel like his team was really trying enough. And then the Lakers game, it's the early game execution, and then they don't do exactly what he had been asking them to do. I guess I could see why, and this is saying that it wore on some of the players, which I could see making sense. I just want to say, from my understanding, I don't think that like Fox falls under that, because it feels like a lot of this is getting placed on like De'Aaron Fox is the reason that Mike Brown is gone. And from everything I've gathered, kind of reading between lines, I don't think that's the case at all. I think that everything that we've seen leading up to this point has been that De'Aaron Fox is a Mike Brown guy. If anything, there's been like little comments here and there from Domas that make me wonder what that relationship may be like, where he says, about time when they start Malik Monk, or makes, little comments about, I thought what we were doing in the first half worked, and then we changed from there. And it's like that I heard more from Domas, and not that there's no reason to not have those complaints. Mike Brown wasn't a perfect coach, but we never heard anything like that from De'Aaron, even as much as he would publicly call De'Aaron out. There's that, what will now be infamous video of Mike Brown and De'Aaron talking at the practice, hours before Mike's eventually let go. But it feels like a lot of this is getting pointed at Fox. And I don't think that Fox specifically was like, I don't like Mike Brown, and guessing somewhat here, but I don't think I've been given any reason, and correct me if you guys think differently, to think that that's the case. And it's just more about production at this point. Not that Fox's situation as a whole is not playing a factor in, maybe Monty feeling like he needs to move on, or if it came from higher than that. But I feel like a lot of this is getting put on Fox just because of the timing of everything. And while his situation, I think, is playing a part, I don't think it's specifically him being like, I don't know about Mike.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I definitely feel exactly what you said. And I also want to say, I think that Frankie laid this situation out perfectly earlier there too. But yeah, I don't think that this is a De'Aaron decision at all. I think, like you said, Brenden, I think it's more so just the fact that the recency of what just happened in that Detroit game, having it look like De'Aaron Fox just was completely checked out on that last possession, having Mike Brown have the post-game presser, which I guess is his final post-game presser, where he pretty much lays out, this is what I told them to do. You guys essentially saw what they did. That really points to a locker room tuning out a coach. And I think, again, I just kind of think that De'Aaron, like you said, has kind of been the poster child for this campaign. And I do, if any of the players are upset, I would agree with you that I would think that it would be more of a Domantas Sabonis, a Keon Ellis, maybe a Malik Monk for the legitimate reasons that you point out there. And when I think about maybe, not to say that, yes, Sabonis does have a bad relationship with Mike Brown, but maybe to highlight that maybe that relationship was a little bit more tenuous. I think back to last year, that Phoenix game where Mike Brown just straight up sat Domantas Sabonis those last closing minutes. And if I remember correctly, Mike Brown had a pretty scathing couple of days after where he kind of really wanted to point out that Sabonis was lacking on the defensive end. And again, we saw that earlier this year with Keon Ellis as well. I do wonder if that level of accountability, as crazy as it is to say, like, is Mike Brown too old school of a coach? Like, we know that he came up with Greg Popovich and Steve Kerr as well, who is also a little bit of that older mindset. I hate to make this like into a generational thing, but I do kind of wonder if maybe the coaching style that Mike Brown brings, and maybe we saw elements of it with Dave Yeager, maybe it's just that this hard-nosed, we're going to hold you hyper accountable, we're not going to treat you with any sort of kid gloves kind of mentality just doesn't work in today's NBA anymore. And I that's the most logical conclusion that I feel like I can come to, because I just don't feel like anything that Mike Brown was doing in terms of holding his players accountable was out of line.
That's what a coach is supposed to do, by 100%. The way.
100%. Every profession.
Everything. And someone put up that video. I remember last year, I don't know if you remember, Brenden, there was a practice where we got let in a little bit early and we were given a green light to record what was going on. And there was an instance where Mike was just laying into Malik, just laying into him, because I think Malik didn't get back in transition on defense, or I can't remember what the exact reason was, but someone from the media ended up putting it out there, and I chose not to, just because I thought, I just didn't want to ruffle any feathers or whatever. And that kind of clip has been circulating a little bit today. And I'm kind of looking back at it now and thinking, that's what a head coach does. I mean, if anyone played high school sports or Parks and Rec or, through college, whatever, coaches are supposed to get on you. They're supposed to kind of get on your ass a little bit. And that's normal. And I think that sometimes we see Mike Brown or, Mike Brown would come out and kind of hold some players accountable, or, call some certain players out saying he wants more. And in Fox's case, it was more so he talked nonstop about how he wanted De'Aaron Fox to be better and better and better. And I don't think it was because for his own personal gain. I think it's because he really truly believes in Fox. He told that story a million times. Mike would tell that story about how Fox came through a camp when he was in high school or maybe a little younger, and how impressive he was, and he what?
He told it day one.
Day one, that's right. And he told it down like often throughout the years. Just like, I knew he was gonna be special. Like I knew he had that talent. And I look at that as a coach that kind of, looking back just off personal experiences, like usually when coaches are like that on you, they believe in you. They want more from you, and they want what's best for you first and foremost. I think that Mike Brown sometimes, that got lost in translation a little bit. I think that sometimes the perception of how of head coaches kind of calling out, if you want to call it that, or calling on their star players, wanting more from them, is looked at in a negative light. And I don't think with the Kings it really ever was that. At least I never saw it that way. I never saw it as Mike saying, wow, like Fox was terrible tonight, and like this is negatively gonna affect our overall outlook, and like maybe I'm wrong about him. No, it was never about that. And I think with Fox the other night, that was like another learning curve. And as we saw, Keegan kind of came out and yesterday said that Fox apologized to the team and took accountability, and that is the most important thing. And I think I was on with you, Brenden, yesterday, and I said that I felt pretty strongly about how Fox had to be better, and he shouldn't come out and avoid accountability. But at the same time, I think that our friend Tristy Rodriguez had a pretty good perspective on it. It doesn't really overall matter as much to the fans and media, as much as fans, they pour their money and their time into his team, and I think it does matter. But the fact that he showed accountability to his teammates behind the scenes, that's the most important thing. You don't want to have disarray in the locker room and disconnect. And I never saw it that way. To me, the whole core of this whole thing to me comes down to a disconnect between ownership, the front office, and the coaching staff. And I think the players are caught in the crossfire. And right now, this is all just kind of a culmination of those two main factors, the front office and the coaching staff, which has been the case for this organization for a very long time, are not on the same page. And Mike kind of now he's officially the scapegoat because of it all.
Hold on. Taking it back to day one as well, what's one of the first things Mike Brown said? Like the key highlight from Mike Brown's first press conference was vertical and horizontal alignment across the board. That is coaches being on the same page as front office on the same page as ownership. And I think he even said, like, all the way down to like the ushers and the people that clean the arena after. Everyone needs to be pulling on the same string. And Frankie, I think everything you pointed out just shows that there might have never really been that level of connection at all.
Yeah, maybe it was never there. And it feels like a lot of the misalignment is really Mike Brown being like, we need to be better at defense at some point if we want to have long-term legitimate playoff success down the line. If that's the long-term goal here, we need to be working towards that, and we can't be a bottom 10 defense. Like, that's just never happening. Even De'Aaron Fox on that Draymond Green podcast talks about Mike Brown sliding him a note and showing that no defense, no team that made the finals, that won a championship, had a lower than, I think it was top 10 defense, except the 02-03 Lakers, who just cruised, and then they were the number one defense in the playoffs. Like, I think that the other side of it is that Monty McNair is like, well, we had the number one offense when we were like fully committed to that. And now we took a step back, but like, sure, we progressed defensively, but really we should just lean fully into the offense. And I think you need to be better defensively than the Kings have been. But I guess like the Pacers last season are maybe a counter to that, which did they end up? Is it Eastern Conference Finals even? No, second round?
Yeah,
no,
it
was
Eastern Conference Finals.
Okay, that's what
they
I thought.
they got destroyed by Boston, but yeah,
right.
And they did go through a very injured Knicks team, and not trying to make excuses, but yeah, they were in the Conference Finals.
Yeah, but that is a fair caveat. Like, it feels like one of those, like, the year that Dame made it with Portland, for example, to the conference finals, and so
you also see where the Pacers are at this year as a counter to that,
right?
However,
and I feel like the moves that the Kings made this offseason like speak to that as well. Obviously, Mike Brown is sitting here talking about how complimenting every other team's length, size, and athleticism, like practically a cry for help, I swear. And Monty McNair goes out and gets DeMar DeRozan. Like, not that DeMar can't bring anything to this team, and I think that he's done okay, even though he's amid a slump right now. But like, that is totally opposite of everything that it seemed like Mike Brown was saying that he feels like this team needs, And then, like, Yeah, Monty talks about how he thinks we can be better on offense again at the beginning of this year, getting the pace back up higher. And that feels like where a lot of the disconnect is. And what's more important, though, the short-term success or long-term sustainable success? And I feel like sometimes it's tough to accomplish both at the same time, and maybe there's a lack of patience going on. But I tend to think that Mike Brown's logic of, listen, we have to at least be decent at defense eventually makes plenty of sense to me, at least. I don't know. Where are you kind of at with it, Frank?
I mean, completely. And I just keep going back to that. And, I don't think Mike was really subtle with it that he wasn't very pleased with the overall state or depth of the roster. And I think he even emphasized, a couple times that, you know, I the plan in practice. I think he was up open at the plan in practice how he goes through offense much more than defense because it's an offensively gifted team. This is a team that has, I mean, first of all, they set a record before the Pacers that was back-to-back years, which is kind of funny looking back at the Halliburton Sabonis trade in retrospect. Kings set a new league record offensive rating the first year in 2022-23. Pacers last year. And, I think the front office overemphasized a strength and kind of hoped that would level out and it's kind of outgunning everybody. And I think Mike at that point kind of was like, you can't expect non-defensive players to suddenly become defensive positives. It's just not like, I don't know how many NBA players make just like a complete turnaround and kind of add to their bag. And there's been cases where guys can get better on the defensive end, sure. But a lot of these guys are in their mid to late 20s now. And the players that they do have that are positives, Keon Ellis, have their kind of lapses on offense. And that's been the big topic of this year. I mean, Keon's arguably the Kings' best defensive player, but can't stay on the floor because he makes some offensive lulls and, isn't where he's supposed to be sometimes. And, Mike gave him a quick hook. I'm very intrigued to see, by the way, if Doug, and we're recording this Saturday morning, by the way. We'll see what happens in Los Angeles. I'm very intrigued to see if we see a lineup change, if Keon's playing big minutes, because Doug Christie, as we all know, that man has defense in his DNA, defense in his blood. Like, I am very intrigued to see how that all works out. But at the same time, like, I think Mike Brown has been, subtly or maybe not subtly banging his fist on the table saying, bring me defenders, bring me forwards, bring me depth. And we've said it again and again and again. It's 2025 almost. Opening night 2022. Outside of Harrison Barnes for DeRozan, the Sacramento Kings have an identical rotation 1 through 6. So I don't really know, again, that part of that Amick Slater article, who knows who they're talking to or what's coming on the pipeline, if that's from ownership or if that's from the front office itself, kind of saying like, the depth has been an issue over the past couple of years, but we're going to ride with the front office over coaching. Like, it's just very contradicting. It's a very contradictory statement that, yeah, the depth has struggled, but we believe in the front office. Why? Because it's not common to fire a GM in the middle of a season, which it's not. And I saw a tweet today even that was like NBA GMs are getting just way longer of a leash than they should. And I do think that's an interesting discussion. I think they probably do. But at the same time, and you said it yesterday, Brenden, as well, you can't fire your GM a month before the deadline. I just don't think you can. And another element to this, which I'm not sure if we're going to talk about or not, is what direction are they going in? Based off that Amick Slater article, sounds like they're going to buy. And that's probably what they have to do. I was walking my dog this morning thinking, like, they can't really blow this thing up right now. They have Fox, Sabonis, Malik Monk, Keegan Murray, Kevin Huerter, whether he's traded or not is here. DeMar, they have too much talent right now. Devin Carter to really just say, you know what, let's mail it in. And the season's too young overall. They have 51 games. I think they're 3 games out of like the 9 or 8 seed right now. It's too early. But will there be a buy-in? Will there be a buy-in from the guys that are left over in this post Mike Brown era? I think there will be for the most part. I think that Doug is mostly or overall well liked in that locker room. But what does the roster look like? Do they go and get a Kuzma or a John Collins? Is that going to make things that much better? I don't know. But it's going to make some conversations real interesting in the offseason for sure because, I mean, we know 100% for certain now that Monty McNair, he's working for his job these last 51 games.
Well, and like De'Aaron's future is still so in question. And I've seen comments of like, this is to appease De'Aaron. And I don't see any world how this does that. Like, not that he has any issue with Doug. It's not about that. But the same way you see Mike Malone, Eric Spoelstra, Rick Carlisle, DeMarcus Cousins making comments on Instagram, like all these guys essentially rolling their eyes. It's hard not to imagine De'Aaron's not doing the same thing right now. Like, how many coaches is he on at this point? I think it's 4 or 5. We talked about it yesterday, Frank. I'm forgetting.
1, 2, 3,
Jaeger.
4, 5. This is 5.
This will be 5. Yeah.
Over 8 years, which really is kind of crazy if you think about it. I mean,
and this is the stable part of the Kings franchise.
Yeah. And I think someone pulled that out, that clip that, our friend Matt George shot from the De'Aaron Fox camp, how Fox preached that having stability and from a head coach, I think he had Jaeger for 3 years, Jaeger for 2 years, Walton for 2 and some change, Gentry for a cup of coffee, and then you had Mike Brown for 3. So Mike Brown, I think, is the most games from a head coach that De'Aaron Fox has experienced in his NBA career so far, and he's gone. And that stability was important. And, Eric Spoelstra today having comments too, and pointing out the fact that he's like, it's a sad business. And, he's like, Sacramento, he's like, I think Spoelstra got hired, in like 08 or 09, maybe a little later, or he was head coach probably a little before the Heatles and everything, right?
Yeah.
So that's, I think, 13 or 14 head coaches. I can't remember the number. 13 or 14 head coaches since then. So since Adelman. So that means like probably 11, 12 head coaches since Eric Spoelstra's been head coaching the Miami Heat. And I can't compare. Yeah. And we can't compare it and say, oh, the Kings should have an Eric Spoelstra or Greg Popovich. They don't grow on trees. I fully understand that. But this amount of turnover with this position, especially under this new ownership regime, not really new anymore, it's been over a decade, it's just the most alarming. Like, there's more head coaches than years at this point, I think. That's just not healthy to me. So, like you said, how will Fox respond to this? I feel like, and it's early, it hasn't even been 24 hours yet, I feel like there'll be louder, chatter or buzz around, Fox. Maybe Brown's gone, he wants out. I mean, maybe we'll hear that at some point. I don't know if we will. I know that Clutch Points, not sure how plugged in they are, said that the Kings don't plan on moving Fox at the deadline. But we've heard that before. I mean, we heard from pretty credible people that the Kings weren't moving Tyrese Halliburton or De'Aaron Fox in 2022. Next morning, the whole world came crumbling down. So, and even with this, in closing, and then I'll turn over to you guys. Sam, who's super credible, and like, not that it's his fault. He was on with Jason the morning before, saying that he hadn't heard any smoke, and that's what makes me kind of wonder what changed, because there probably wasn't any smoke to it. There probably wasn't any, clearance. Maybe the front office was trying to get him gone for a little bit, and maybe Vivek finally said, time to hit eject. Maybe I've seen enough. I don't know. But the one thing I will say, as we've heard for years, that they've been pretty enamored with Doug becoming the eventual successor to Mike Brown or to whoever took over. And in that article, it was interesting to see from Sam and Slater that Doug was the one pushing for the job when Alvin was there. So Doug's someone who wants to be a head coach, which we're going to see. He's got his shot now, but it just really kind of makes you wonder that the behind the scenes kind of order of operations that led to this, because it seemed like it wasn't happening until it was. And then it did on a phone call in the car nonetheless. So.
Yeah, Chris, take that where you want. Whether Doug, De'Aaron.
My goodness gracious.
We're back in the side recording room, Chris, at the studio like we were 5-6 years ago, however long it was ago.
That was the exact reaction I had
Frank,
when I was.
Are you referring to when Doug Christie was our coworker?
Yeah. Yes, I was, and was talking to our boss Jose. He's like, I think we're gonna have a good shot of getting a coach on for the Kings, or getting someone on from the Kings now. So hopefully we can use that connection. But
yeah, I mean, again, I said it last time, but Frankie, very well said. Yeah,
sorry
man.
to rant, by the way.
No, not at all. I think today is definitely the kind of day for it. Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll just start with what direction are they going now? Like, what does this really ultimately mean? Is this, because that's the thing that I think I still don't even really have clarity on, and honestly, I think it's all just speculative. Anybody you talk to at this point, was this move meant to be a shot across the bow? Is this hey, we're not giving up on this roster, but we needed you guys to understand that there's ramifications to your actions? we still believe that, obviously we're going to have to hire a coach at the end of the year, but we think there's enough talent here to ultimately succeed. And Brenden, you and I were kind of talking the other day, the only other interim situation that's maybe similar to this, people brought up Joe Mazzulla and Ty Lue, is more so Nate McMillan with the Atlanta Hawks, where they end up going to the conference finals. That's obviously a pie in the sky, but is that more so the hope, is that you let go of Mike Brown, you still believe in the talent, maybe you still make acquisitions later on down the line? Or is this a first step? Is this a Mike Brown is fired, and that does mean that we are kind of more or less giving up? Like, if you're having an interim head coach for 50 games, how much success do you really hope to have? If you are bringing in, let's say, we'll say a Cam Johnson. So now, I don't mean this to sound any offense to Doug Christie, because I do believe that Doug is going to have the ear of that locker room, but you are trusting a guy who has never been a head coach a day in his life to now bring together a roster that you are still expecting to be successful. And then we obviously talked about, okay, if you are trading De'Aaron Fox, what do you do with Kevin Huerter? What do you do with Keegan Murray? What do you do with DeMar DeRozan? What do you do with Malik Monk, Domantas Sabonis? The list goes on and on. I don't really know ultimately why this decision was made. I understand this is kind of, obviously last year wasn't great, but this feels like the first major bump in the Mike Brown era, and to kind of abandon ship. It's not the Mike Malone situation, but there's elements of this that feel similar to the way, way, way too soon of Mike Malone. And that's why I kind of started the pod saying this felt sudden. I guess sudden is not really the right phrasing. It's more just, it didn't feel like this was the time that it needed to happen. Not saying that it wasn't going to happen at some point, but just the urgency is the part that doesn't make sense. And then to kind of tie in with what Frankie's point with Eric Spoelstra was, we know, like you said, that Doug Christie has been the plan for being the head coach behind the scenes, and nothing in terms of him being forced to be the head coach, but, it was always an idea floated. I kind of feel like at this point in time, I would be shocked if Doug Christie is not the head coach moving forward. More so, yes, because it's always been in the plan, but you just fired Mike Brown, again, a descendant of the Greg Popovich coaching tree, somebody we just heard, Eric Spoelstra, Mike Malone, who cares how much weight he carries, George Karl, Rick Carl, like all these guys come out, and that's a really big coaching tree that you just really pissed off. I don't know how many people are going, like, we know agents talk and hold grudges. These coaches are thick as thieves, man. Like, I don't know how many people are going to even be wanting to get the job here in Sacramento. And let's not forget, Mike Brown was the right choice among Steve Clifford and Mark Jones, or Mark Jones, Mark Jackson as the other option. So
he's still out there.
Even last time, our pickings were a little slim, and we obviously, funny enough, some of the candidates that we had in there, Charles Lee, the coach of the Hornets, Greg Hardy, my goodness, Will Hardy, the coach of the Utah Jazz, and Darvin Ham actually was one of the coaching candidates for a second year in Sacramento. So it's more just that if they are going to do this whole coaching search at the end of the year, I just don't trust that they're really going to end up with a coach that has any more experience or any more credibility than Mike Brown. And it feels like this is more of a trust thing. And I do wonder how much of this might to start feel like the San Francisco Giants for a couple years, where it was Farhan Zahidi running things and he was very analytical, and it seems like there was a disconnect between manager and GM there, and there might have been a similar, hey, we have this mentality in the front office versus, hey, you have this mentality as a coaching staff. I wonder if maybe they hope Doug Christie's going to be that happy medium where he understands how to do coach or how to do player speak and things like that. But he's also, I'm not saying he's like a scab but like he obviously has ties with Vivek. In the article, I think it mentions Matina in the article. Like, he's got deep roots here. I kind of feel like they're hoping he's going to be that happy in-between medium, and I don't know, man. I mean, I don't know how well that works. I trust Doug Christie. I think he's a fantastic guy. I think he's got a great basketball mind, but much like what we talked about when he almost took over this job when Alvin got it, I just kind of feel like he's being set up to fail here, and it feels a little A little bit like the Vladi situation, obviously, but it just doesn't feel like the right move.
And just real quick before I pass it to you, Brendog, the main like thing for me here is, and as someone who grew up, and I know Chris, you were the same way. Like we grew up watching those teams, those early 2000s teams. Like I think I became a basketball fan because of those early 2000s Sacramento Kings teams. Like literally a special place in everyone's heart that is a Kings fan. And with that being said, I can say that for whatever reason, this franchise is so overly obsessed or nostalgic about that, and they're putting way too much faith in the players or names that were attached to it. And again, Doug Christie is a great guy. He is a basketball lifer. If there's anyone that could probably come in and make it work out of anyone that was out of the Vladi situation, the page in the front office, Doug Christie has been a part of the Kings locker room for the past couple of years. He's been a player first and foremost. He knows what it takes, I think, to coach a basketball team. We'll see if he can coach it at an NBA level team here. But I just can't help but look at all these decisions and Vladi being a GM, Peja being in the front office, even Bibby coming back and being on TV. Like you're being hired by the Kings at that point. Like there's so much just faith in these guys, man. And
Bobby Jackson was a coach for a long time.
Bobby Jackson in the house. And like, again, Bobby earned it. And like, I think Doug's kind of under that same hat. Like those guys that are under the coaching tree, I don't think you can really fake it or be like a mascot, I guess, to that point. Like Bobby's in Philly right now. And with Nick Nurse, who's been a respected head coach for a while, who may also be on the hot seat coming up. We'll see. It seems like Philly's turning it around, which, by the way, New Year's Day, Kings and Philly, just two teams that are really just kind of in basketball hell right now coming through Golden One Center. But
I keep forgetting they actually play basketball games.
They play basketball
tonight is about to be crazy.
Last thing, and then I'll turn to you, Brenden. I'm saying that I feel like all the goodwill and all of the, they were a media darling a year and a half ago during the first Beam Team season. Even last year, they got a bunch of national TV games. They actually have a bunch of NBA of national TV games coming up. Like they backloaded the Kings schedule, which we'll see if some of those get flexed if they keep losing. But all of that goodwill just gone like that. Like they're automatically back to being the Kangs, just the doorstep of the league, the laughing stock, just the inept franchise in Northern California. They're right back there. And regardless how you feel about this whole situation, that is how the majority of the outside, media markets, outside teams, and someone last night responded to a tweet saying, "Who cares? It's all about what happens in Sacramento." Sure, maybe for today, and then the same people are complaining, why don't the Kings get more love on SportsCenter or on TNT, or like why are the NBA on TNT? Why are the inside the TNT guys ripping on the Kings or yada 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 down the line? This is why. These are the reasons why people do not take the Kings seriously. Why free agents did not want to play here before, and like you said, Chris, the coaching it already was thin before. Like you said, Mark Jackson and Mike Brown were the finalists for that job. We're talking about two different paths here. And one of those names might be back in the mix this summer.
That's horrifying. That hadn't even crossed my mind. Don't you think
it's possible? Do you really think it's not possible that his name's going to pop up again?
I plead the fifth.
Oh, Franklin. Oh, no. I agree with you. I think that they are a laughing stock, and I think it's an instance of where if you're wondering why everybody's laughing at you and trying to blame everybody else, like you're the commonality here. And there's a reason that all these highly respected people are being like, what the heck are you doing? Because what are you doing? Like, I have faith in Doug Christie as a person. On all accounts, you guys have interacted with him more than I have, but on all accounts, seems to be a phenomenal person.
Hall of Famer.
I don't think that he is qualified to be a head coach in the NBA right now. Even the Bobby Jackson example, right? Bobby Jackson spent some time on the back of a bench. He went to the G League and coached Stockton for a while. Yeah. And then now is more, I forget if he's front of the bench with Nick Nurse, but it's a process, right? And people will say, well, Doug Christie coached Summer League. I'm glad that at least happened. But by the way, he was already going to get this interim tag before that Summer League thing even happened, back when Alvin Gentry eventually got it. And it's a lot. And the other thing I'll throw in is that I think important to keep in mind, like Doug Christie is a Domantas Sabonis guy, or maybe if you want to say it that inversely, Domantas Sabonis is a Doug Christie guy because that's his personal trainer on the Kings. That's who's working out with him in the off season, or going overseas. Leandro Barbosa, kind of similar. And I'm curious to just see what else the trickle down looks like. Who else on this coaching staff stays?
That's what I was wondering too. Like Luke Laux is gone. Like Luke Laux is just he is 100% gone.
Luke is at the shoot around video.
No, I'm not saying now, but at least by the end of the year, he's gone.
Okay.
Like next season, you're gonna have to fill that gap. There's no way.
For sure. And like, does Jay Triano? I know that I had said before that I don't imagine that he would want the job, but what if he did and he got leapfrogged by Doug Christie?
That's what it said in the Athletic piece.
It
looked like I don't, and that they didn't specify if Jay was open to it or not.
But it says, I have it here, quote, the beloved former Kings guard and current assistant coach was meeting with the higher-ups, talking about Christie, accepting their offer of a promotion into the main seed on an interim basis and leaping lead assistant and former Toronto Raptors head coach Jay Triano in the process. Coach DeMar in Toronto, by the way. But yeah, that wording stood out to me too, for sure.
And then let's popping up on the feed here. Sean Cunningham and Dave McMenamin from Kings Shoot Around. Sean says that De'Aaron Fox says he did not know what was happening until it happened with Mike Brown. And then Dave McMenamin says Malik Monk has a message for Kings fans. Quote, sorry, fans, we are going to turn it around. I mean, of course, that's what you have to say.
Yeah, I guess. Malik,
I don't know, man. We're going to see. I mean, the upcoming schedule for the Kings, I can pull it up. I mean, they're 6-12 at home. That's another thing. It's like they're 3-11 in games by 5 points or less. So really, if they win, they've lost 3 games by 1 point. If they win those 3 games by the point differential, is Mike Brown still getting fired? I'm starting to think that maybe the decision to fire Mike Brown was made like well before last night, and I don't really understand why the extension took place then.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
It was such a huge story, and we don't know the specifics about the relationship between Monty McNair and Mike Brown. I just feel like clearly there was a large level of disconnect, or there was some grudges going on. You're going to be paying Mike Brown of the Kings $20 million he's owed for the rest of this year and the next 2 seasons. So whoever they hire, it's going to be the same thing with Luke Walton and George Karl, down to who was before, Yeager, to Keith Smart, and down the line. The Kings have had just a nonstop stream of paying multiple head coaches at once. And this is a team, by the way, which I think we talked about a week ago, or maybe we talked about on the air. I can't remember. If you're going to be paying multiple head coaches at once, you're willing to do that. Why wouldn't you just bump yourselves up into the tax a little bit? If you're going to be paying millions more per year, what, 5 million or 8? No, it's 8-9 million per year. Math. I think 7, 8, 9 million a year the next 2+ seasons for a coach that's going to be on a beach somewhere or on someone else's bench. Why not invest more of a team in the on-court product? It's just the most perplexing thing to me by far, that they were like, let's fire Mike Brown and pay him the next 2.5 years. And then maybe we'll go trade for Kuzma, or go trade for John Collins, or go trade for Dorian Finney-Smith, and we'll, slap a Band-Aid on like a 5-foot gash in the hull of the Titanic. It's just ridiculous to me. So I don't know, man. It's just a very perplexing situation. And we could be sitting here in a week and the Kings are 4-1 in the last 5 or whatever. And hey, Keon's in the starting lineup or whatever happens, and they're playing better. Malik's back in a 6-man role. Devin Carter, who should be playing for Stockton today, could be back in the Kings, or could be making his Kings debut sometime this upcoming week, which that seems like that'll be the case. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on. But really, this is kind of just like taking the air out of the sails. Like, this kind of dragged the Kings back down to the spot where they have to prove themselves again, after being in a spot where they didn't have to. So, I don't know, man. Just pretty bleak. Pretty bleak.
Yeah. I feel like the order of operations really tells you kind of what you were saying there too, Frank. Like, it tells you really maybe that they never actually, at least from the Monty McNair standpoint, never really believed in Mike Brown as their coach. The fact that you fire him before you're even making adjustments to the roster is the part that really makes no sense to me. Like, how are you not, again, if you're going to make this Cam Johnson trade anyway, how do you not do that first and then see, okay, we really gave him a fair shot at a good roster, and he wasn't able to do anything with that great improved roster? Like, the fact that they fire him first tells me that they never wanted him, or they being Monty, and maybe Wes, I guess, gets lumped into this as well because he gets brought up all the time in these conversations as well. So Monty and Wes must have decided they never, or there might have been some split. Maybe it was like you said, they felt like from an optics perspective, they had to have that stability. Meanwhile, Monty McNair kind of maybe in the back of his mind always knew, we can get rid of this guy. Like, I can convince Vivek to get rid of him. It's Vivek's money. It's not my money. I just need the optics to work for a little bit, and then we'll handle the situation if we need to, as they did. So I don't know. The fact that they make that this was the first order of business, not, hey, let's tweak the roster. Let's add a Juan Toscano Anderson to the roster before we make sure that Mike Brown just has completely lost the locker room. And that's the other part of it too, is the only other reason I can think of this immediate of a firing is if you feel like he's completely lost the locker room. And I don't think we think he has, but again, the play and how I think that Detroit game ended really does look like he did. So maybe it's more just of an optics thing from that perspective. I don't know. Again, this whole situation, it just confuses me. And I think a lot of people share that it's just so confusing. Every part of this doesn't really make sense.
No, it doesn't make sense at all. I like to think I'm usually more optimistic. I'm very, excuse me, as I'm getting sick, very pessimistic about this move. I just don't. I hope Doug proves me wrong. I just feel like he's a bit underprepared to be in this spot at this current point in time. And like, I just don't get it. I don't get it at all. I think this is probably the end of De'Aaron Fox in Sacramento. And to be fair, I think we might have already been at that point without, actually, we're probably still in the same circumstance, really, is that they could turn this next part of the season around, I guess. But I just feel even less confident in those odds of that even potentially happening. Because like I said at the beginning, there's 51 games left. And yes, you're 12th in the West. That's a tough spot to be in. And there's being a little bit more distance, 2.5 games out of 11th, but 4 games out of 7th. That's not horrible to make up in 51 games. And I just feel less confident in their ability to do that at this point. 5 in a row. Are they going to beat the Lakers tonight? And I don't know if I saw any update on Domantas Sabonis and how he may look in tonight, by the way.
He's playing.
Okay.
Well, he told Sean he's playing.
Gotcha.
But to your point, just kind of like big picture, I mean, this is it, right? I mean, if they don't turn it around, if they don't get into the postseason, whether it's a plan or at least a plan at this point, I think we can assume Fox is gone. Like I think 100%. We can be pretty confident he's not going to be moved at the deadline unless they completely bottom out and lose 9 of 12 or they fall 15 under. I don't know.
I'm not confident that they won't do anything, Frank.
Yep.
That's true.
A little like maniacs.
They feel like they're definitely wilding out a little bit, but I feel like if they're competent, which that might be giving the organization a little bit of credit right now, they'll ride it out and see what they have for this last ride, last dance, whatever the hell you want to call it, before they strip it down to the bare bones and pieces, because they do believe Doug Christie is the head coach of the Kings in the future. They should probably strip it down to the bare bones next year and have him go through a rebuild and kind of learn, take the ropes. And is that something I would love to watch? Hell no. I not to put the fan part of me way out of here. Like from a journalistic, from a work standpoint, any other person can attest to it is not great to cover a rebuilding team. It is not a great fulfilling experience. We've done it already. We're not really a full rebuild, but we've covered losing teams for a couple of years now. It is much, much better for the fans, media, organization, everybody, for this team to be where they were the past 2 years. It was great to watch them be where they were the past 2 years. But if they're in a position where the Kings win 33 games this year and De'Aaron Fox is 1 year on his contract, I think you probably have to see you later. Like, it's probably time to go back to the drawing board. And also it's hard because if they do miss the playoffs again this year, I'm not sure what the protections are on that pick with Atlanta, Brenden, but they could lose the first round pick anyway, right? Or no, if they make the playoffs, they lose the pick. So never mind. So they're going to keep that pick again, which is what protected?
Top 12 protected this year, top 10 the year after.
Okay, well, they're probably going to keep that. If they were to bottom out, they'll keep it. But if they really want to if they really want to have if they want to ride things out with this core, and they believe in the Fox, Monk, Murray, Sabonis, like beyond the next 51 games, they have to make like a run of all runs. I'm talking Artest Stojakovic trade where the Kings were dead in the water and they rattled off like a 24-10 record of their final 34 games. Like it's got to be a huge turnaround, and they're about to be fully healthy. They're about to get Devin Carter back. We're gonna have the full Kings roster healthy for the first time all year, and we're gonna get a good look at Carter. And then it's time to evaluate options.
By the way, Mike Brown never got to see a fully healthy roster.
That's what I just thought. I was like, except for the coach. Yeah, we have a fully healthy roster, except the coach is, well, I was
my God.
Dead, but yeah.
My God.
Yeah.
Can we, to close, just talk about like in a more personal aspect? I loved covering Mike Brown. I thought he was very entertaining.
Yeah.
And just, half a second of reminiscing of now I have to change my Twitter header picture where he's eating a cookie and giving us a funny look at the table, or the turn on the Jets.
Oh my God.
What else am I missing?
Putting his sock, like showing his socks, putting like
foot
his foot on the table multiple times, by the way.
Multiple times.
Very flexible. He would do he just throw it up there. It's like I would probably tear a hammy if I did that. But
absolutely.
No,
I just have so many Mike Brown videos in my phone. It's crazy.
And we can keep those. And I have a lot too. I thought about I have a couple pictures of him. Like there's one this year of him literally walking into the scrum after practice and being like, hey, I was having a burrito or a Chipotle. It was like, do I have some of my teeth? He's like just showing everyone his teeth, like just showing him out there. And I have a picture of him mid doing that. It looks like he's a crazy person, but that is Mike. Mike is kind of crazy. He's like the wacky uncle or something like that. Like he's hilarious. Guy's got a good heart. Like I think he genuinely loved being here. He was super involved in the community, going to high school football games, just a great guy, And again, like it's unfortunate it happened to him. I think he didn't deserve it. I don't think many people deserve what happened, but definitely not Mike Brown, who's been around for 30 years as starting in the video room and down the board. But really just a very insightful coach who really, and we covered Luke Walton at the beginning of our media, careers here, and his pressers for practice and for post game situations were probably like 4 or 5 minutes, maybe. Mike's were all double digits, like 10 plus minutes. And I know for us uploading those to YouTube and everything, like they take a little longer because he just would talk and talk and talk. And I know Brenden, you'd appreciate the demonstrations. He would take us on the court sometimes and show demonstrations, kind of peel back the curtain, and really just I don't think you get that from other coaches. I mean, you really don't. Just talking to a couple other guys that have covered the game a lot longer than us. I think Sam in particular, who's super plugged in, was like, I wish more coaches did this because it's helpful. It's insightful. It helps us do our jobs better. And I think he'll be remembered fondly in Sacramento, and he deserves to be. They don't break the drought without him. What? No, it's not like that.
No, I don't blame you.
No way.
It really
is. It really is.
He's literally just gone one day.
He's here one day and he's not. Yeah, he's not the next.
When is any other post head coach? And we saw Luke Walton on the bench, and I think it was with Detroit the other night. So I guess he was in the building, but
he's not in Cleveland anymore. Oh my God.
Well, that was with JB, and so now they're in Detroit.
Oh, there you go.
We're not going to see him anymore. Or it's like a I don't know. It's like if your friend, like you're really cool, like your friend's dad and like your friend's parents get divorced and like you're like, oh, your dad's not around anymore. Like dad's awesome. Like and then you see him like you only see him like at sporting events, and you're like, oh, well he's it's weird. Like I guess he made the mistakes because the mom's still around. I don't know. Like, I don't know, man. It's
I agree. I'm sitting here like, oh, I was doing a show yesterday, and I'm like, oh my God, I missed my last. Like, I could have talked to him one last time. It's really the reality of it.
That was crazy, by the way.
Crazy.
The crazy that broke mid, like while you're on the air, like you were on the air for 3 hours and 40 minutes, and it broke the last like 18 minutes.
I was so
yeah.
That's whatever.
And we literally were on saying. It's not gonna. People in the comments, by the way, which they will be on this video too, and that's fine. I think a comment keeps popping up saying, "Thank you to Frankie and Brenden and the Sacramento media for getting Mike Brown as extension." Yeah, if we had much of a hand in front office decisions, I think there would have been some moves a long time ago, friend. But I don't know, man. It's over. It's a bummer. Where do they go from here? Who the hell knows? but we'll be there for it.
Don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened.
Real quick, just
This isn't a funeral. This is a celebration of life.
That's right.
give me a record here for the next 1,
Oh
2,
my God.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 games through January 10th. You have the Lakers, the Mavericks, the Sixers, the Grizzlies, the Warriors, the Heat, the Celtics. 7 games. I'm gonna
they're
say
gonna get killed by the Celtics.
destroyed.
That's the annual whooping.
It's in Boston. It's a yearly slaughter. Except last year, it was actually a pretty good game. Last year, they arguably should have won that game. Colby
because Boston took out all of their starters in
True.
the fourth quarter,
Right.
and the
But
Kings
still.
went on like literally a 20-0 run or 20-1 run.
But wouldn't it have been nice if they would have just kind of knocked it out? But anyway, 7 games. I'll start. I'll say they go 3-4, which puts them in a worse place than they are now. That puts them 6 games under. So I'm gonna say 3-4 over the next 7.
I was gonna say the same. Like I almost want to say worse, but I think that this goes one of two ways with the players, right? Like I wouldn't imagine Doug is really coming in and changing all that much instantly, at least.
Like
over time.
schematically?
Yeah, right. Rotationally, maybe, right? But what they're running, I feel like it's hard to just change all of that right away. And either the players are more motivated by this, it lights a fire under them, or they start to check out a little bit more than what has already been the case. And the answer is probably a combination of both, depending on which player. But that's why I kind of see this going both ways. And I'm probably going 3-4 also, just because, Miami is not super impressive. The Lakers are not super impressive. The Warriors are not super impressive. I think
And the Kings are.
They're not super impressive either.
And quick side note, the games that are at home, you have Lakers on the road, then you have a homestand of Dallas, Philadelphia, Memphis. You go to Golden State for one game, then you play Miami before playing Boston on the road. So you got Miami, Memphis, Philly, Dallas at home.
If they lose 3 in a row, does Doug Christie get fired?
What is next? Like, I don't know. Like Doug will be the head coach till April, correct? Like, can we agree on that?
I hope so.
Yes.
At this point.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
What do you got, Chris? 2-5.
I think they could go 1-6. I think they can go 2-5. Like I don't know why. I don't know. I mean, it's funny, but I kind of think Brenden just made the biggest point of it all. Like, we don't know how it ultimately matters how they respond to this, and I don't know why. If I'm a player, I would feel like this is now going to be more positive. Like, I don't know why I would feel like, oh yeah, Mike Brown was the thing that was actively holding us back. Now we can take this thing to another level. Like, that's just incredibly unprofessional. And I just think that there's a ton of people who had a lot of incentive for this season to go well. And I just don't really believe that they were intentionally tanking and now there's some other gear that they're willing to go to. I don't know. I just feel like they're going to be worse off for this, and it doesn't really mean I never thought this was a coaching problem in the first place. I think they just got worse at coaching, and I think that is going to mean that they are going to play worse. It's kind of that simple to me. And I mean, I'd be happy to be proven wrong, but I don't see why I should feel like this team is going to be any sort of good basketball team moving forward.
By the way, we're still in a situation where about a quarter of their wins are against the Utah Jazz.
Stop it. Stop
and also looking back at even their last win, which was almost 3 weeks ago, mind you, 16 days ago, they beat the Pelicans, who are the worst team in the NBA. And remember, they almost didn't. CJ McCollum had a go-ahead 3 that rimmed out. They almost blew a late lead. They obviously fall apart against Denver, and then the rest is history. But even the wins they have, like, I mean, there's really nothing that makes me feel optimistic, like you said.
Frankie, even again to that point, like, and I know I hate to just maybe bring us back around the loop, but like, why now? Why wasn't the because to me, like, the vibes were down after the first Laker loss, and then you lost to the Lakers again, and then once you lost to the Pacers, it was like, oh my gosh, this is really happening. To me, like, the fact that, and there were so many days off in between. There was the Nuggets loss, which I didn't even mention because they actually played hard in that game. like it just, that's the part that again just doesn't make, the timing of all of this is terrible. And even the Friday news dump element of it, like you said, Friday at 1:40, nobody's going to be talking about it. But we had to record this on Saturday because by Monday this is going to be old news, and that's what the Friday news dump is for. So like, just all of it is so terrible. It's just I can't wrap my mind around this.
And it was a hardcore Friday news dump. Like
It's
was
the
a
definition of one.
The 2
East
days
Coast
after,
shows are done at 5:00.
Yep, 2 days after Christmas.
2 days
3
after.
o'clock.
Oh my God.
3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Which I think the 2 days after Christmas might answer the question a little bit of why now rather than right after the Pacers game.
His family was out here. Mike's whole family was out here.
Right.
He told us. His whole family was out here for the weekend games. His dad hadn't been out here, I think, maybe ever during his Kings tenure. And they're in their 80s now. And it makes me wonder too, if Fox doesn't foul Ivy and that 4-point play doesn't happen, I don't think this happens. I don't think, maybe it happens
Agreed.
next week.
No, I agree.
There's no way they fire him after they.
I agree with you, and I just think it's insane that could be a logic at all. Like,
but they lost.
That play was terrible, man. That play was terrible. And you know what? It's funny because I said it last time we recorded, but these guys have been playing like they are trying to get their coach fired, and that game, that specific play, is a play that gets your coach fired, and it did. And that, unfortunately, is on De'Aaron Fox. And like, De'Aaron's got to wear that. And I think the fact that he had his post-game press conference the way he did, like, again, I've been a De'Aaron Fox guy. I want to root for De'Aaron Fox. I want him to be the franchise player, but this has been a mess. Like, this has been an absolute mess of a season for him. And I kind of was thinking about it as we have to start to explore De'Aaron Fox trade rumors and things like that. I could really see this going ugly and this potentially being a really contentious relationship between the two. Like, De'Aaron is not the type to play nice and, or not, I wouldn't say play nice, but he will not hold back his feelings. And I don't think he's necessarily going to come back here and have a lot of soppy feelings if he does get traded.
Yeah, I wonder what those comments are going to be after he gets traded. I didn't even think about that.
I thought about that last night too.
I've been thinking about it almost nonstop.
And I think they'll be. I get a little bit of venom or a little bit of bite, which I hope not.
Sure. I think he can be an all-time villain. I really think.
I think towards the organization, but I think the city he would still try to express that, but that could get lost easy.
But yeah, I mean, we saw what happened with Tyrese, and
isn't that unfortunate though that every time a player of that stature leaves Sacramento, and it started with Chris Webber, who was estranged for a couple of reasons that shall remain nameless. Since it's gotten a little better. But players that have to leave the organization now come back under just sour circumstances or don't come back at all. They're just gone. You don't have like people coming by that you're like, oh, this, other than Brad Miller, who hasn't been at many games this year, or maybe not any, is loved and he's at games and, you know, he's got a drink and a smile on his face every game. And it's great to see him there. But, it does suck that Fox might join a long list of Kings that are going to start just ripping their hearts out. And maybe it's in Houston or San Antonio. I'd like to, like you said, Chris, hope that the Kings turn things around. And Fox, like you said before, for years, not hyperbole or it's not empty. He truly does want to win here because he says winning here would be better than winning it'd mean more than winning anywhere else because no one's done it before. And we'll see if they can. I think being in a 13-18 hole at this point in the year is not an ideal start to that. But there is a lot of basketball to be played. A lot of drama to unfold. I'm bummed a little bit now that I'm going to be on leave, but also happy. I might need a little break for
get out of here, man.
For when that baby arrives, which will be any day now. But I know that when I come back, it's going to be right around deadline time, and it's just going to be crazy, man. It's a crazy time. We literally things got too boring. I guess I don't know. Things got a little too boring around here, and now we're right back in the midst of it. So.
I also want to make sure, too, that while we're pointing fingers at everybody, that we do make sure to point out that, like, Vivek is getting singled out here a lot. Like, as George Karl and DeMarcus and, like, you know, Mike Malone as well. Like, they all directly mention, look who is, like, Mike Malone, I got fired by the same person. I think it's DeMarcus, like, look who made the decision, or SMH wrong decision. I think George Karl said, look who's making the decision. Like, that is the part that is also frankly, candidly, really scary to me is, You can fire Monty McNair. You can fire Mike Brown. You can trade De'Aaron Fox. You cannot release an owner. You can't get a petition signed to get your owner out of the city. Like, if this is at its core of Vivek Ranadive problem, I don't know what we do with that. Like, Vivek has to change. Like, that is the core of it. Like, did he learn anything from the Mike Malone firing? This doesn't look like he did. And so, and maybe from the George Karl, like you said earlier, Frankie, he's back to paying multiple coaches at the same time. It seems like he's not learning lessons, and it seems like, as we've been afraid of the impulsive owner making some big trade decision, bringing in Ben Simmons, bringing in Kyle Kuzma, like, this might have been really the decision that we should have been afraid of. Something of pretty immediate magnitude like this. Like, I will like to state for the record, please, the ownership of Vivek Ranadive is starting to make me nervous that maybe this team will never get over the hump because of these luxury tax reasons that you laid out, Frankie, because of the impatience, because it seems like every player or person of importance in this organization seems to directly point at him when it comes to what went wrong. That makes me really nervous.
And yeah, just to kind of close, the answer is no. He hasn't learned from it. And I think from a guy who I want to remind myself, I guess, he saved the Sacramento Kings. They were going to Seattle. They were going to be gone.
Yeah, sure.
And he saved them. He ponied up the money. He found a way, got an ownership group. He saved the Sacramento Kings. I think that the fan base will be forever grateful about that. However, what's followed that has been over a decade now of just a circus, man. It's been a circus. He's been meddling in and out. We've heard he was a little more behind the scenes as of late. I don't think that's really the case anymore. I mean, we know how he was getting, what happened with, the nepotism part of it, having Anjali in the G League and down the line. Like, there's been things that have been red flags for me the entire time. It's not a knock on them. Anjali seems very nice, and like, Vivek is overall, I think, a nice guy too, just in my general, very brief interactions with him. But you have to know what your lane is and you have to stay in it. And we're now at a period here coming up right now. I guess this period is right now. It's 51 games, or the next year plus. In the end, through the next off season, it is going to be a turning point where fans completely turn on him, and he becomes maybe one of the most despised owners in sports. Like, you see
he's tying in with John Fisher, man. Like, that's another part of this too.
Another part of it, yeah, he said people from other markets turn against him because of the John Fisher thing and aiding the A's. And that's a business venture, which people are lumping him with the Kings. And like, maybe that's rightfully so, that he's deserving some flack or getting some flack. But I've seen people rip on the previous Mets ownership group, the Wilpons, rip on them. And finally they have, Uncle Steve Cohen over there slinging millions out to Juan Soto's and whoever down the line. Now they love it. When does that change with ownership though? Like, you have to have that change of tone, because right now it's all negative. Like, I don't know if anyone's out there today in Sacramento going, yeah, well, we trust Vivek. Like, we love Vivek.
Right.
Vivek saved the Kings. Like I said, that goodwill though is gone. Like, you had a winner.
Completely.
Fans have had a taste of winning. You've given them that. That was provided. You pressed the right button somewhere along the way. You have to do it again. You have to do it again before things get even worse. And before we see a full-on, trust the process, Presti project, whatever you want to call it, rebuild, where the Kings are having to sell off all of their players, collect the chest of Danny Ainge level picks, and just drag themselves through half a decade of losing before we hope they can turn into what the Oklahoma City Thunder are. Or they can build around this core and seize the next 3 to 4 or 5 years and change the narrative. But like we've talked about for the past hour plus now, how often does that happen over something like this? I just don't know it does.
Not very often. And last thing I'll say is that, we talked about all the just craziness behind this. Mike Brown is not a perfect coach, and I don't think any of us were trying to give off an impression that he is. The rotational stuff, there are some question marks, the timeout usage, but he's trying to hold his guys accountable. And I think that there's maybe like 6 coaches in the league that are really winning you games. There's probably about another 5 or 6 that are really losing you games. And there's a bunch in the middle. And I think it's fine that Mike was one of those guys in the middle. And I'm questioning where Doug Christie is going to fall on that list, So Mike Brown's not flawed because I can just already predict the comment section saying that, Mike has his issues, and he does, but everybody does. The front office had their flaws. They're not really getting held that accountable for this, at least in this scenario, for all it seems.
But real quick, not to interrupt, that's a problem though. Like that, and that's now not going to be you can't blame Mike anymore.
There's
it almost seems like the front office being like, hey, we got to blame it on someone so it doesn't look bad on us.
But the people that are on that side of the fence, Brown's a problem. Brown's a problem.
Get Brown.
That's not an excuse anymore. And like, I'll eat my words, sure. And I'm not sure if you guys feel the same way. If the Kings win 7 games in a row and the lineup tweaks work, I'll say, hey, maybe Mike was too stubborn. And like you said, Brenden, he's not perfect. But if things go wrong, are they going to start going at the front office more? Because I'm telling you, and we run the socials 1140. We read the comments. 90% of those comments are about Mike Brown and going at him. I'm just looking forward to seeing what happens if this doesn't work out the way that they think it's going to. And if it does, great. Happy it works out. But again, man, very skeptical.
I also think In Monty We Trust is dead. Like, that's something that we heard a lot of Kings fans throw out throughout the years, and at least personally, like, I don't really have, especially after this decision was made, like, I don't have trust that the GM's going to get them out of this situation. Like, I think Monty's sat on his hands for way too long here, and the fact that, again, they make this decision before actually making a trade to try and make the actual team on the floor better, they pinpoint Mike as the problem. That tells me that you don't actually understand what the problem is, and that's at least how I personally feel, and I just can't. We've been all waiting too long for Monty McNair to make that move to make this team better, and then for him to realize that this is where he's been putting his blame and not on the roster that he's put out there. That makes me lose all trust that you're going to be some savior. I'm not saying he doesn't know talent. I'm not saying he can't figure out how to get good players in here, but in terms of like Monty McNair being anything kind of like what you just laid out, Brenden, GMs, maybe there's some great GMs and then there's some actually terrible GMs. I think for me, any illusion that like Monty McNair is something special, if anybody had any of that, like I think that's, for me at least, completely gone.
Yeah, at this point, I'm kind of ready for anything. I'm holding on to every notification sound, and who knows? It could be De'Aaron, it could be DeMar, it could be Malik, it could be Keegan, it could be anything at this point in my mind. And obviously, some I feel like are more likely than others. I still think we're talking about Kevin Huerter, Trey Lyles, picks, whatever. But yeah, this current reality of the Kings. Anything final thoughts before we get out of here? I just want to say, by the way, I'm a little impressed. Frankie always says we don't need to talk about Juan Soto, but I swear you've mentioned him in every episode.
I'm scarred. I am scarred. I'm coping. I'm mourning, and Cody Bellinger's going to be fine.
Let's not talk about Corbin Burns.
That's crazy, by the way. No, my final thoughts are just same thing I said a couple years ago in Atlanta Half Team, where the Kings fans deserve better, and the fact that I have family now yesterday saying they're kind of bummed they got a bunch of King stuff for Christmas is enough to just be like, oh my God, like we're really back to this again.
We're back.
We're really back to this again, where the Kings, like I mentioned earlier in the pod, like they're having to prove themselves again. So the Kings fans, fan base as a whole deserves better, especially at home. My God, 6-12 at home, win a game at home. Like, my goodness. Like, and again,
6-12 is crazy.
It'll be so unsurprising if they rattle off wins on the road. They're the third best road team in the NBA since the beginning of the 22-23 season. They are 21st in the NBA in that same time frame in home record. So, you deserve better, guys, and we'll see how it all unfolds.
Yeah, I don't have anything to say. This was supposed to be a 30-minute podcast, and there was no way. There was just no way.
No, it's insanity. It feels very Kings to me. I can't help but laugh through it all. We'll see what happens. Devin Carter might play tonight for the Stockton Kings.
Devin Carter better be good.
Devin Carter better be good, bro.
That's my next thought.
That would help. That would put
damn good.
That would put some goodwill in Monty's corner for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll see what ends up happening moving forward. Doug Christie acting as interim head coach after the Sacramento Kings. Reportedly, the front office, I guess, decided to move on from head coach Mike Brown into his third season with the team. So we'll keep covering that as everything unfolds. We'll see what direction ends up taking place after the fact on SactownSports.com, also on Sactown Sports 1140. All of our radio shows 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday. Be sure to check out the great work there. And wherever you're listening to this podcast, whether that's on the YouTube side or an audio side, likes, subscriptions, ratings, reviews, all that stuff is always appreciated. Helps more than you guys know. And thanks for listening. Stay all right. Keep your head high best you can throughout this time. And hopefully there's a couple beams coming up in the near future, but we'll see. Thanks to everybody for listening, and you'll hear from us again in the next week or so.